The alien creatures had been brought to Earth from distant planets. Once feared as deadly, these beings were now domesticated, kept in secure facilities, and treated like pets. Humans had managed to tame them with advanced technology, but few understood the depth of these creatures' intelligence. To the world, they were simply magnificent beasts, loyal, obedient, and harmless. At least, that's what everyone thought. Dr. Sarah Lang, a scientist working with the Intergalactic Research Center, was fascinated by these creatures. She had spent years studying their biology, behavior, and even attempting to communicate with them. One of the most remarkable specimens in the center was a large winged creature named Exalor. Its translucent wings shimmered like glass, and its eyes glowed a faint blue. Most humans saw Exalor as a beautiful, gentle being, but Sarah believed there was more to its story. Something about Exalor's gaze made her uneasy. There was an intelligence there, too much intelligence. Exalor had been with the center for 3 years. It was one of the first creatures to be successfully tamed, and everyone thought it was peaceful. But one day, something strange happened. Sarah had just finished her daily rounds, feeding and checking on the creatures. As she passed Exalor's enclosure, she felt a strange chill. The air felt different, almost electric. She glanced at Exalor, who was sitting calmly, watching her with those eerie, glowing eyes. For a moment, she swore it was smiling. But that was impossible, right? She shook her head, telling herself it was just her imagination. But when she turned to leave, she felt something unusual, like a whisper in her mind. It wasn't words exactly, but a sense of urgency. A strange feeling crawled under her skin. She paused and turned back toward Exalor. To her shock, the creature's eyes no longer glowed. They were now dark, almost black, and the connection she felt was gone. Sarah frowned. "I must be tired," she muttered. "I need to get some rest." The next morning, Sarah came back to the facility early. She was determined to finish her research on Exalor and its species. However, when she entered the lab, she found something that made her heart stop. Exalor's enclosure was empty. The door was wide open. Panic rushed through her as she sprinted to the control room. The guards, who were supposed to be monitoring the creatures, were in a state of confusion. Exalor had disappeared without a trace. How could this be possible? The doors were locked, the security systems were intact. There was no way the creature could have escaped. A cold dread settled in Sarah's stomach. She knew Exalor was no ordinary alien. But now, it seemed that her suspicions were right. It wasn't a matter of taming Exalor. It had allowed itself to be captured, to be tamed. But why? Over the next few days, strange things began happening at the center. Equipment malfunctioned, lights flickered, and cameras went down at odd times. It felt as if the facility itself was turning against them. Some of the staff claimed they felt watched, like they were never truly alone. The behavior of the other creatures also changed. They grew more restless, more aware. Sarah was growing more paranoid. She started to investigate Exalor's disappearance, trying to track down any clues. As she reviewed the security footage, her eyes widened in disbelief. The footage showed Exalor pacing in its cage late at night, staring at the camera. Then, it paused, and right before the camera cut out, the creature seemed to look directly at the camera, as though it knew it was being watched. The next night, Sarah stayed up, watching the security feeds. She refused to leave until she got answers. As midnight approached, the cameras flickered once again. She held her breath, eyes glued to the screen. And then, just like before, Exalor appeared in the frame. But this time, it wasn't alone. The creature had somehow freed another of the alien species, a smaller, more dangerous one, and together they moved toward the control room. Exalor's glowing eyes were now fully visible, as though the creature was aware of its surroundings in ways humans couldn't understand. The pair approached the main computer systems. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Exalor placed its paw against the control panel. The lights in the room flickered one last time, and the system went completely dark. She rushed to the control room, but it was too late. The creatures had already disabled the security systems. Panic surged within her as she realized what was happening. Exalor wasn't escaping it, was leading a coordinated strike. As Sarah backed away, she heard a voice in her mind again. This time, There were words, "Help us," or "We will do it ourselves." She stumbled backward, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a creature anymore. It was a leader, and its plan was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Sailor had waited patiently, played the part of a pet, all the while building an alliance with the other aliens. It wasn't the humans who controlled them, it was the other way around. Suddenly, the facility alarms blared, and Sarah realized she was not only trapped in the building, but she was also part of a bigger plan. Zalor had used her, just as it had used everyone else, and now the alien rebellion was ready to begin. Sarah's thoughts raced as she ran down the hallway, unsure of what to do. She was the only one who knew the truth. And now, it was too late to stop what had already begun. The alien creatures had been arriving on Earth for years. Each one different, each one more mysterious than the last. Most were tamed with ease, their dangerous instincts suppressed by technology. But there was one species, the last of its kind, that no one truly understood. It was called the Exynthar, a creature unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The Exynthar had translucent skin that shimmered like liquid glass, its long, thin legs allowing it to move silently through the air. Its eyes were deep and black, seemingly endless. It had been brought to Earth just a year ago, but no one had been able to crack its behavior. It was a puzzle, and no one could figure it out. Even the top scientists at the Intergalactic Research Facility were stumped. Among them was Dr. Emma Richards, a young, determined scientist. She had spent months studying the Exynthar. While the other creatures in the facility seemed content with their lives, the Exynthar always seemed different. It never looked like it was just a pet. There was a strange intelligence in its eyes, a deep, hidden knowledge. And Emma knew that something about this creature was far more important than anyone realized. One evening, after a long day of research, Emma stayed late in the lab, watching the Exynthar through the glass. She had noticed its strange behavior once again. The creature wasn't simply sitting there, as it usually did. It was moving, quietly and deliberately. Its eyes were fixed on the lab's control panel, as if it was studying the data in front of it. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the machines. Emma watched carefully, heart racing. She'd been watching it for weeks, but tonight felt different. There was something in the air, something she couldn't quite explain. Then, for a split second, she thought she saw the Exynthar's eyes glow faintly. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. It was as if the creature had done something that Emma couldn't understand, something it was not supposed to be able to do. Curious and cautious, Emma decided to enter the lab. She pressed the button on the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss. The Exynthar didn't move. It simply sat there, its eyes watching her every move. She took a step forward, slowly, keeping her eyes on the creature. As she approached, she saw something she had never noticed before. The markings on the Exynthar's skin seemed to shift, like the creature was changing its form. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was happening right before her eyes. Emma reached for her datapad and started recording the changes. But as soon as she touched the screen, the creature's eyes narrowed. She froze. The Exynthar was no longer just observing her. It was aware of her intentions. In that moment, Emma realized something shocking. The Exynthar wasn't just a passive creature. It had been watching her, learning from her, studying her every move. A loud noise suddenly echoed from behind her, making Emma jump. She spun around to see a flashing red light. The alarm was going off. "Not again," Emma whispered. She turned back to the Exynthar, who was now standing perfectly still, its eyes glowing brighter than before. A strange feeling washed over her, a mix of fear and fascination. She had never seen the creature act like this before. The loudspeaker crackled, and a voice came over the system. "Dr. Richards, we need you in the control room, now. There's been an issue with the containment field." Emma hesitated. She wanted to keep her eyes on the Exynthar, but duty called. She quickly left the lab and headed for the control room. As she walked through the dark corridors, her mind raced. What was going on? Why had the Exynthar reacted like that? And why did it seem to be communicating with her in ways no one else had noticed? When she entered the control room, the other scientists were already gathered around the main console, looking concerned. Dr. Samuel Park, the head of security, stood near the main screen, his face pale. "Dr. Richards, you need to see this," Dr. Park said, motioning for her to come closer. Emma approached the screen. It showed footage of the Exinther's enclosure, but something was off. The creature was not where it was supposed to be. In fact, it wasn't even inside the containment field anymore. The system had malfunctioned, and the Exinther had somehow gotten out. "No, no, this can't be happening," Emma whispered. She couldn't believe it. How could it have escaped? The security measures were foolproof. There was no way it could have gotten past them. But the footage wasn't the most shocking part. As Emma watched, the Exinther appeared on the screen, but not in its usual form. It was changing again, shifting, blending into the background. The creature was transforming, and the more Emma stared, the more she realized that the Exinther was not only capable of hiding its presence, it could also manipulate the facility's technology. It had been doing this all along, right under their noses. The realization hit Emma like a ton of bricks. The Exinther had never been a captive creature. It had been playing a game with them. It wasn't just a rare specimen. It was the last of a race of beings who had mastered technology far beyond human understanding. The creature had been watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true power. And now that moment had arrived. As Emma turned to face the others, she could see the fear in their eyes. The Exinther wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was the key to something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. And Emma knew, deep down, that the creature's secret was far more dangerous than anyone could prepare for. For years, humans had captured alien creatures from across the galaxy. They were no longer the terrifying invaders they once were, but rather obedient pets or workers, used for everything from labor to companionship. The Intergalactic Control Center, located on Earth, held hundreds of these creatures, each species with its own unique abilities. All of them were contained, monitored, and controlled at least. That's what the humans thought. Tessa Ward had worked at the facility for 5 years, overseeing the alien creatures. She was used to their strange behaviors, their alien ways. She'd become somewhat of an expert in understanding them, but there was one species that always baffled her. The Jakar, a small, gray-skinned creature with large, intelligent eyes. It was docile, always quiet, and had never shown any sign of aggression. But something had started to change in the last few months. Tessa noticed it first when the Jakar would stare at the control panels, almost as if it understood the technology. The creatures were supposed to be mindless, mere tools for humans, but the Jakar seemed different. It seemed to know things it shouldn't know. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but soon she couldn't ignore the patterns. The Jakar never made a sound, but Tessa began to sense that it was watching her. Not just with its eyes, but with a deeper, more calculating gaze. It was as if the creature had been planning something that no one could have anticipated. One evening, as Tessa walked through the facility's hallways to check on the creatures, she felt a strange stillness in the air. The usual noises, the hum of machinery, the shuffling of guards, were absent. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She stopped in front of the Jakar's enclosure. The creature was standing still, staring directly at her. This time, the look in its eyes was different. It wasn't just a gaze of curiosity, it was as though it was waiting for something. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A loud alarm blared through the building. Tessa's heart skipped a beat. It was a security breach. Panic surged within her as she ran toward the control room. Inside the control room, chaos had erupted. The screen showed that multiple containment fields had been deactivated. Some of the aliens were moving freely, their cells unlocked. A few of the guards were trying to regain control, but the situation was spiraling out of hand. The Jakar was no longer in its enclosure. It had vanished. "What happened?" Tessa demanded, rushing over to the lead technician, who was frantically trying to restore power. "The system. It's been hacked," the technician replied, his voice shaking. "We can't get the locks back online. Someone has taken control of the facility." Tessa's mind raced. The Jakar. It couldn't be a coincidence. She'd noticed it before its strange behavior, its focused gaze. It had been studying the control panels, learning everything it could. But who was helping it? It had never acted alone, never shown any signs of aggression or rebellion. Until now. As Tessa turned to leave the control room, the building's emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows on the walls. She knew she had to find the Jakar before it was too late. She rushed back to the holding area where the creatures were kept. The hallways were eerily quiet, but she could feel something stirring in the air, something tense. It was as if the very walls were holding their breath. Then she saw it. The Jakar stood at the far end of the hallway, surrounded by a group of other creatures. But they were no longer passive. The once docile beings, the gentle beasts who had been kept as pets, were now moving in unison, as though they were following a plan. The Jakar was standing in front of them, its small hands raised as though giving orders. Tessa froze in place, her heart racing. The creatures weren't attacking, they were organizing. The Jakar turned its head and locked eyes with her. There was no fear in its gaze, no panic. It was calm, focused, and in control. Tessa felt a chill run through her as she realized the truth. The creatures had been planning this. They had been waiting for the moment when they could take back control. And now, that moment had arrived. "What's happening?" Tessa whispered to herself. The Jakar's eyes flickered, and then it raised one hand. Without a sound, the creatures began to move forward, spreading out across the facility. Tessa backed away slowly, her mind racing. She had to warn the others, but she couldn't risk alerting the creatures. The rebellion had already begun, and it was silent like a storm waiting to break. Tessa found a small control panel hidden in a corner and started typing in commands. She had to stop the creatures before they broke free completely. But as she typed, she noticed something strange. The lights flickered again, and the screen in front of her went dark. "Impossible," she muttered. Then she realized she was being watched. The Jakar was standing just behind her, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. The creature had anticipated her every move. You knew?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The Jakar didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The rebellion wasn't just about escaping, it was about taking over, about reclaiming what had been taken from them. The creatures were no longer just prisoners, they were fighters, and they were smarter than anyone had ever realized. Tessa took a step back, her mind racing. There was no stopping them now. The creatures had learned how to communicate, how to manipulate the system, and how to act in unison. The silent rebellion had begun, and it was bigger than she could have ever imagined. As the Jakar turned and walked away, leading the others, Tessa knew one thing for sure. The world had changed forever, and there was no going back. The Intergalactic Control Center was home to dozens of alien creatures, each from a different corner of the galaxy. They had been captured, tamed, and now lived under the watchful eyes of humans. Some were brought for research, others for work, but none were ever treated like true companions. They were viewed as tools, nothing more, nothing less. But there was one creature, unlike the rest, that no one could explain. The Krillian was a large winged species from a distant star system. It had sharp talons, sleek black feathers, and piercing eyes that glowed softly in the dark. When it was first captured, it was seen as a dangerous creature. Yet, it quickly became clear that the Krillian was different. It was unusually calm, docile, and for reasons no one could understand. It formed a connection with Dr. Elara West, one of the senior researchers at the facility. Elara had always been fond of animals, but the bond she felt with the Krillian was unlike any other. The creature seemed to understand her, its eyes would follow her movements, and it would make a soft humming noise when she spoke. There was no scientific explanation for this behavior. No one else in the facility could get close to it without provoking aggression. Yet, when Elara entered its enclosure, the Krillian would remain still, even lowering its head in what seemed like a sign of respect. For months, Elara studied the creature, documenting every interaction. But the more she learned, the more questions arose. Why was the Krillian so attached to her? Why did it trust her when it had shown no interest in anyone else? Something wasn't adding up. One evening, after finishing her shift, Elara returned to the Krillian's enclosure. She had a strange feeling that something was about to happen. The air was thick with tension, and the usual hum of the facility seemed to be quieter than normal. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even though the hallways were empty. As she walked into the Krillion's chamber, she noticed that it was standing at the far corner, staring at her. But this time, it wasn't just the usual calm look. The Krillion's eyes were intense, almost pleading. Alara's heart raced. It was as though the creature was trying to communicate something urgent. The humming sound it usually made had stopped. Instead, there was a strange vibration in the air, like the creature was calling out for help. "Are you okay?" Alara whispered, stepping closer. Suddenly, the Krillion took a step forward, its talons clicking against the floor. It reached out with its wing, gently brushing against her arm. Alara froze. It was a subtle gesture, but it was enough to make her realize that the Krillion was trying to tell her something. Just then, a loud noise echoed through the facility in alarm. Alara spun around, her pulse quickening. She ran toward the control panel at the edge of the room, but before she could reach it, the Krillion made a soft noise. It wasn't a warning or a cry for help. It was a command. Alara paused, unsure of what to do. The creature's gaze never left her. She stepped back, unsure of what was happening, when the alarm went silent. The lights flickered and everything in the facility seemed to still. The tension in the air grew thicker, and Alara could feel the weight of the moment. The Krillion was no longer just a creature, it was a key, a symbol of something much bigger than her. The control panel in front of her buzzed to life. The screen showed a strange series of symbols, ones she had never seen before. They were too complex to be anything human-made. Alara had no idea how the Krillion had managed to manipulate the systems, but she couldn't deny it. Somehow, the creature had triggered the security lockdown. Before she could comprehend what was happening, the lights in the facility turned red. The emergency alarms began blaring once again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Alara realized, with a sudden chill, that she was no longer in control of the situation. The Krillion walked towards her, its wings rustling softly. It reached out again, this time with both wings, and touched her gently. It wasn't a gesture of aggression, it was something far more intimate. As it did, Alara's mind began to swirl with strange images. For a brief moment, she saw flashes of the Krillion's home planet, a place she had never visited but could now feel in her bones. She saw towering cities made of crystal, vast fields of light, and a people who shared a connection with the stars themselves. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Alara breathless. What was this? How was the Krillion able to communicate with her like this? Then, a voice crackled through the intercom system, sharp and urgent. "Dr. West, get to the control room. Now. We need you to stabilize the systems. The aliens are escaping." Alara didn't respond immediately. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of the images, the feelings, and the connection she had just shared with the Krillion. There was something deeper here, something far more significant than just a tame creature or a tool for research. The Krillion wasn't just a subject of study. It was a messenger, a creature with knowledge of the future and the secrets of its species. She turned to the creature, eyes wide with realization. "You're not just here to be studied, are you?" The Krillion's eyes met hers again. This time, they were filled with something more than intelligence. It was a silent understanding, a bond that had formed between them over time. Alara wasn't just the researcher anymore. She was part of something much larger, something that no one else could comprehend. The Krillion nodded slowly, as if affirming her thoughts. The alarm still blared in the background, but Alara felt a calm certainty settle within her. She wasn't alone in this. The Krillion had chosen her, and together they would reveal the truth. She wasn't just unlocking the secrets of an alien species. She was unlocking the key to a future none of them were ready for. And with that, the true mission began. For years, the Intergalactic Control Center had held various alien species, each confined to their own enclosure. They were captured, studied, and tamed at least. That's what the humans believed. But one by one, the creatures were beginning to show signs of rebellion. No one had noticed it at first. They thought the creatures were harmless, docile, even affectionate. But what the humans failed to understand was that these so-called pets were not as tame as they appeared. Among them was a species known as the Valkyrin. Large, muscular, with sleek scales that shimmered like metal, the Valkyren were seen as one of the most dangerous creatures. However, when they were first brought into captivity, they had shown no signs of aggression. Instead, they behaved like docile animals, calm and seemingly harmless. They were put on display in a special wing of the facility, and the staff enjoyed their beauty, marveling at how easily they could be trained. Eliza Gray was one of the leading researchers at the facility. She had worked with the Valkyren for months, studying their behaviors and training them to follow simple commands. At first, it seemed like a success. The Valkyren would respond to hand signals, even nudge their large heads against Eliza's shoulder as though seeking affection. It was almost as if they had forgotten their wild nature, as though they were becoming tame. But Eliza had always felt a strange unease when she was near them. It was hard to put into words, but something about the Valkyren's eyes, their piercing, intelligent gaze, never felt right. It was as though they were watching her, waiting for something. A few weeks ago, she had begun to notice small things. The Valkyren no longer responded to her hand signals as quickly, and their movements had grown more calculated, as if they were learning. One evening, as Eliza prepared to leave the facility, she made her usual rounds to check on the creatures. When she reached the Valkyren's enclosure, she noticed something strange. The door to their holding area was slightly ajar. A small flicker of light came from inside. She frowned, moving closer. "Did I forget to lock it?" she whispered to herself, reaching for the door. But the moment her fingers brushed the surface, she felt a cold chill run down her spine. The Valkyren were watching her more intently than ever. She stepped back, uneasy, as the creatures slowly rose from their resting spots. There were 4 of them, massive and silent. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, but it wasn't the soft, docile glow she was used to. This time, it was sharp, focused, as though they were fully aware of their surroundings, fully aware of what they could do. Eliza shook her head. "No, they're just adapting," she muttered, trying to calm herself. But the sense of unease only grew stronger. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed down the hallway. Eliza's head snapped toward the sound. It came from the control room. She immediately started running, her heart racing. Something was wrong. She needed to find out what was happening. As she reached the control room, she found the door wide open. Inside, chaos had erupted. The main control systems had been overridden. Screens flashed with strange symbols, ones Eliza didn't recognize. She ran over to the console, desperately trying to regain control, but nothing responded. "What's happening?" she murmured, hands shaking as she typed in commands. But the systems remained locked out. Her mind raced. Could it be that the Valkyren were responsible? But how? They were just animals, weren't they? Then the lights flickered. A low growl echoed from the hallway. Eliza spun around, her blood running cold. The Valkyren were standing at the entrance of the control room, their massive forms filling the doorway. But they weren't the same creatures she had worked with. Their movements were more deliberate now. They were standing together, in a loose formation, as though they were waiting for something. Without warning, one of the Valkyren stepped forward. Its eyes locked onto Eliza's, and for a moment, she saw something she had never seen before: an intelligence, a purpose. The creature wasn't acting on instinct. It was making decisions. Suddenly, Eliza realized the truth. The Valkyren had never been tamed. They had only been waiting. Her mind flashed back to all the little signs she had missed: their intelligence, their learning, their subtle behaviors. The Valkyren had been watching her, learning everything about them. Humans in the facility. They hadn't been docile or obedient, they had been biding their time. And now, it seemed, their time had come. She stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The Valkyren were no longer the pets she had once thought them to be. They were a threat, a calculated force that had been quietly planning, waiting for the right moment. Before she could react, one of the Valkyren raised its head and let out a sharp, piercing roar. It echoed through the facility, sending a shockwave of fear into Eliza's chest. The other creatures responded in kind, their roars filling the air, shaking the walls. The facility was no longer safe. Eliza had to act fast. But as she turned toward the emergency exits, she realized that she wasn't the only one in danger. The Valkyrin had already disabled the security systems. All the cages were open. The other creatures, many of them dangerous, were now free to roam. The facility was in chaos. Eliza rushed to a nearby comm panel, trying to send out a warning. "This is Dr. Eliza Gray." The Valkyrin, she paused, unable to believe what she was about to say. "They've taken control. The pets are not tame." They were never tamed. As the Valkyrin's roars echoed through the hallways, Eliza's only hope was to escape and alert the world about what had happened. The creatures she had once thought of as pets had become the hunters. And now, the humans were the prey.